Hello, I'm a little kind of nasally sinusy right now. Hopefully it doesn't end up coming through too much in my voice in the recording here, but oh yeah, I felt like using a different background image for this one for the heck of it. It's a character I somewhat tried to model after myself in Final Fantasy XIV a couple years ago. Anyway, this is kind of long overdue. I originally wanted to say thanks to some people at the start of a video series covering a specific game I've mentioned before, but for various reasons that kept getting pushed off, and recently I've been thinking I should just say what I wanted to say now, just in case I don't eventually end up doing that video series for whatever reason. Plus, it's been put off for too long already. And what I wanted to say is, thank you. Thank you to the people who directly helped me get through that ordeal I went through with the hospital so that I can actually be here to even say this right now. Thank you to everyone who helped brighten up some moments during that time and thus made it, a little easier for me to deal with. Thank you to all the awesome people I remember and even the awesome people I've forgotten. Of course, the folks at Shands Hospital are not the only ones this message goes out to. I just gave them top billing in the video title because that is the place that was finally able to get me better, and also because there is a slightly higher chance that this message could be seen by some of them, given that they were the only people that I actually made aware of my YouTube channel. Normally, I'd probably be more shy about that sort of thing, as evidenced from the fact that I didn't tell anyone at any of the other hospitals about it, but I think at that point, when I had gotten there, I guess I had just fully stopped caring about the little things and stopped really being shy about much of anything. And also at that time, it also happened that I just started thinking about my channel a lot again, started thinking about and even looking at some old videos I had made and things that were left unfinished that I wanted to finish. But yeah, I met awesome people everywhere I went, more than I could count. It was a very long time, so, some staff would rotate many times, not to mention I was in 9 different hospital locations for varying amounts of time, more than once in some cases, and sometimes different rooms or entirely different floors within those same locations at different times, so yeah, needless to say, I met a lot of people over those, couple years. And I won't pretend everything was perfect or that everyone was awesome. I had some less than good experiences, but nursing is a tough job, very tough, and people have bad days or bad weeks, especially in that profession. And yeah, some people just are unpleasant no matter what because that's how they are. But, I met a lot more great people than I did people who were not so great. And if there hadn't been so many great people, it would have been much harder to get through all of that, if not impossible, if I hadn't had many great people at all. So I appreciate so much everyone who is really kind to me or had nice conversations with me. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I feel bad that I can't clearly remember everyone, but it's to be expected. It's with so many people over such a length of time, and not to mention the fact that there were some points where I was somewhat strongly medicated, so there's that too. But I want you to know that it mattered, and that I didn't completely forget or anything. I even remember a few names. I didn't want to name any names when I was originally thinking about making this video. I was figuring, if some people who remember me do see this, I didn't want them to feel like they were less important, or, I didn't want them to feel bad if I didn't name them, but I think maybe it's better to name a few people than to name no one. And I will just say that I can sometimes be absolutely terrible with remembering names, so it really doesn't mean anything necessarily if I couldn't remember your name, as bad as that is. There are some people I can pretty clearly remember everything about them, besides their name. And, of course, there are 2 people I can remember a little less clearly, but I know I like them a lot. And yeah, there are those people who kind of exist on the faint edges of my memory who I can kind of barely recall, but I still know I liked them too. And with all that, I know there are almost certainly some people that I've actually just completely forgotten, probably. But even that doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't important to me at the time, you know? Like I said, I want this to be a thank you to all of them, even the ones I can't remember. But I will also go ahead and give some special mentions now, just a few who I can. So, first, thank you to some names I can remember who were all doctors. Let's start with Dr. Tan, who is the one who performed the necessary surgery on me that allowed me to move past everything, finally. She's one of the best at what she does, from what I recall hearing, and it sure seems like it to me. There were a number of possible outcomes for that procedure, and I'm grateful I can say I came out of it in the best possible way I could have. Dr. Glover is one of a number of doctors who oversaw my care in the later stages of my hospitalization, and she's the one who kind of took charge overall from that point on. Even when she wasn't the one actively seeing me at a given time, it wasn't unusual for whoever was on the floor seeing me at the time to kind of refer back to her about stuff, so. And she was one of the best doctors I had anywhere, since she looked into things that not everyone did, and she was also the one who suggested trying a different Crohn's medication for me, which ended up being much better for me than anything previous. So those were all things that were really important for me to be able to work toward getting stronger, because I did have to fight through and overcome some of my deconditioning before surgery for them to even be able to perform it and expect any kind of good outcome. Because I really was that weak for a time where they couldn't touch me surgery-wise, not safely, so. Dr. Glover also advocated for me a lot behind the scenes, too, I recall hearing. She had some rank she could pull, and I'm very fortunate she chose to pull rank, because I ended up being kept in that hospital far longer than is really terribly normal by my observation. Usually at a certain point, they try to ship you off to a long-term acute care facility or something. And they even did do that to me once, but it was observed that anytime I went elsewhere like that, I just ended up worse off, so keeping me there was, I think, vital to me making it through everything eventually, so yeah, there's a lot that I have to thank Dr. Glover for. Now, these next two weren't at that same hospital, but I'd also like to name Dr. Mompi and Dr. Sanchez. Dr. Mompi was just quite frankly, he's just an absolutely wonderful human being. I wish that all doctors could be as compassionate as that man. He took good care of me when he was overseeing me, too. He's a good doctor, too, but also just a great person. He's actually the one directly responsible, though, for me for finally ensuring I got that, definitive Crohn's diagnosis, which was pretty important to my treatment going forward. Dr. Sanchez was one who oversaw my case sometime before that at a different place, and he was pretty alright, too. Friendly and knowledgeable from what I remember. But also, he kind of saved my life at one point. I was not getting proper care at a certain long-term acute care facility. I won't go too much into detail. It's a story for another time, perhaps, but suffice it to say, I was actually beginning to approach death, and the doctors at that place thought I was going to die, and they were pretty much just going to let it happen. Just keep me comfortable, and that's it. But someone who I also kind of owe my life to was calling the hospital I had been at, and or talking to Sanchez himself, I'm not sure. And he pulled together a team of other doctors, too, in the dead middle of the night, and made this place send me back over to their hospital. And what they actually had to do for me ended up being way more simple than they thought. Really dumb detail that was overlooked, essentially, but nevertheless, if he hadn't taken charge and made things happen for me, despite it being late into the night and everything, I might not be here right now. Morbid talk aside, it's not only doctors that made a big difference to me. In fact, the people I would see by far the most would typically be the nurses and technicians, assistants, physical and occupational therapists. So, naming some people there, Lauren was one of the main therapists I worked with a lot, and she was great. She had good energy and was like really nice. I always looked forward to working with her, and we really were kind of getting to feel more like friends than anything after a while. Drew and Dante are two people who actually don't fall into any of the previously mentioned categories, but I still much appreciated my visits from them. They were basically volunteers, so they would just stop by to hang out for a bit and chat, or even play a game for a little while. They were also there to provide like activities if I wanted any, like a game, like if I could have borrowed a game console or something from my room, but I was pretty much just okay with my smartphone. But that was also something they were there for, to just like offer various activities that I could have to help keep me occupied. It was really nice to just get to chat with them for a bit, though, and pretty fun when we got to play a card game they had, too. I would probably never have heard of Exploding Kittens if not for them, man. It was a silly, pretty good time. I feel really bad that I can't remember the third person's name, because it was 3 people who visited me, and I remember her pretty clearly, too. This is the exact kind of thing I was talking about earlier. Like, I remember her just as well as the 2 guys, and like the way she sounded and acted, kind of the way she looked. Just the name escapes me, but I really did appreciate her visiting me just as much. You know, a couple people actually contacted me after I got home. I kind of lost touch with them, but it was really appreciated. Genuinely, it felt really nice to, have them reach out to me like that. I've just never been great at maintaining things over distance like that, though. It's kind of a miracle, frankly, that any of my closest friends are somehow through the internet. Though it didn't help that when people reached out to me, there were some technical issues. Like, it seemed evident that I somehow missed an email somewhere, and I wonder if my reply went through too or not, come to think of it. And then there were, one of them contacted me through YouTube itself, which, yeah, remember when YouTube had private messages? Not anymore. Unfortunately, even at that time, I think YouTube was already kind of in the midst of kind of working toward phasing that feature out. Because I remember that, like, I didn't even get any kind of notification. So I just had this private message that I didn't know was there until I happened to go load up my YouTube inbox for no real reason. Maybe I had a reason and I don't remember, but, yeah, basically I didn't look at that much because I didn't typically have people messaging me. So when I did go in there, it's just like, oh, there's this, like, 2-week-old message. Thanks, YouTube, for telling me. Anyway, that aside, so another name I can remember is Glenn, who was this really chill dude who I would see on night shift sometimes, and I was always happy to see him again. I hope he's doing alright. I wish I could remember more names, because there really were a ton of cool people, some of whom I remember even without the name, but that's all the names I can really remember offhand at the moment, and I suppose this video is kind of getting to be long enough anyway, so... But before I wrap things up, near the beginning of my hospitalization, when a few people really, really stood out to me as being really cool, I wrote their names down in a note on my 3DS, which I used that for that at the time because I actually didn't have a smartphone yet. Fun fact, I got a smartphone because of the hospitalization, and it was a much better way for me to stay in touch with like my mom and stuff. And anyway, yeah, I wrote a few people's names down in the 3DS, and I kind of gave up writing down names after a little while when it became clearer to me just how long this hospitalization was probably going to be. But nearer to the beginning, these are names that I wrote down. Chris, Sierra, Iris, Jacob, Janice. Was it Janice or Janice? I think they pronounced it Janice. Julio, and Crystal. While those 7 stood out enough to me to want to write down their names, I would also like to point out a few of them specifically for making me feel like family even, which was kind of a really cool thing to have during, it's cool that I had something like that during my first couple weeks of hospitalization. Kind of helped me acclimate. Even though my actual mom was there for me a lot, Iris kind of felt a little bit like a mom to me when she was my nurse. Jacob was like a fun older brother. He even kind of reminded me of my actual brother to a surprising extent. And Janice was super sweet, like kind of like a doting older sister, and oh, she was so sad the time she knew it would be like the last time she would see me because I was going to be going to another hospital. I wish somehow, like, I hope somehow she and really a lot of people might hear through the grapevine that I made it out okay. People talk sometimes, so it's possible that word about that might get around. I hope it does. Especially because, when my mom ended up in the hospital too, I did end up meeting, just a couple people who remembered me, so they got to see how much better I was doing, and hopefully, it's possible that, they'll talk and word will get around. I hope it does. Speaking of that, though, she isn't one of the hospital workers, but I would be remiss to end this video without also mentioning my mom. She was there for me so much. You guys have no idea. She spent so much time literally by my side for well over a year until some health issues prevented her from doing so. But even from afar, she was always there when I needed to talk or text, and even from afar, she still would be advocating for me, which unfortunately was sometimes very necessary. There are things that would not have happened, or bad things that would have happened, if she had not advocated for me. When you're that sick in the hospital, you sometimes might need someone to have your back like that, and she definitely had mine. It isn't an exaggeration that, without her, I would have ended up dying in one of those places. It's not a question, that's what would have happened. So I give my mom my thanks as much as anyone else. With all that said now, sometime during the next year, if circumstances allow it, I would like it if I could play through and record that game, Trauma Center Under the Knife, for the DS. I was always curious about it, but I don't know if I ever would have actually committed to the idea of playing it before all this. I don't know, I was always kind of worried about maybe being squeamish with it, but because of this, I checked into it. And yeah, the graphics in that game I think are, like, not detailed enough to bother me or anything. I think it's fine. I can handle it just fine from what I could tell from trying it a little bit, so but yeah, I mean, I basically thought it would be nice to go through a game where you're playing as a surgeon, and basically all the primary characters and heroes of the story are hospital workers, and take that and dedicate it to the hospital workers who helped save my life. Lately, things have been pretty crazy in the world, and even in my personal world, so to speak, so, there's no guarantees in life. I can't totally promise it, but that is something I would very much like to do, and so if that sounds cool to you, keep an eye out for it. But for now, it's about time I sign off, so thanks for listening, and take care of yourselves.